Good evening. I would like to call the City of Maplewood Planning Commission to order on Tuesday, August 20th. Roll call.
John Eads.
Fred Don.
Paul Arbuckle.
Bill Kempy.
We are missing 3 people, aren't we? Tashar.
Chair and Commission, you're missing Tushar Desai and Lou Yang,
Okay.
2 members tonight.
Okay. Approval of the agenda. Any corrections or additions?
Chair and Commission staff does not have any changes to the agenda as presented.
Need an approval?
Move to approve.
Bill's motion, second by Fred. All those in favor?
Aye.
Hearing all ayes, passed. John is on the minutes. Approval of the minutes. Any corrections or additions on the minutes from July 16th?
Move to approve.
Bill made a motion to approve, second by Fred. All those in favor?
Aye.
One abstention from John. Public hearing. Staff?
Chair and Commission, there are no public hearings tonight. You do have an item under new business. If
Okay,
you'd like to
number
go into
6,
that.
A is the North End Vision Plan.
Sure.
Staff.
Thank you, Chair and Commission. Tonight, we have Jay Dema from the firm Perkins and Will to talk about our North End Vision Plan. You received a link to that document in the last couple of weeks, to that draft vision plan that the North End Working Group had been working the last several months on developing. I know 2 members here were active participants in that group, and so I would encourage you to help the discussion, or, as part of that discussion, and your experiences in working on developing the plan. But our intention is to have the commission tonight make a recommendation on the plan, and then we would bring it to the city council. We're looking at the September 9th council meeting for the council to formally adopt its vision plan, and then the work begins after that. But I don't want to get too much ahead of it, because I know Jay has a presentation, or a discussion at least, for you tonight. So I think with that, I just asked the chair to recognize Mr. Dema and have him come forward tonight.
Thank you.
Can we have the 2 members that were represented in the North End?
Oh, sure. Chair and Commission, you had nominated Chairperson Arbuckle to represent the Planning Commission. And then Commissioner Kempy served on behalf of the Community Design Review Board. He happens to sit on this group as well.
You could have came if you'd like.
You missed out.
The document was done very well when I read through it. It's awesome.
It was an open bar every night.
I was surprised there was no glossary though in the back with some of my quotes.
Yeah.
Would you like to come up front then, Jay?
Yeah, you can just approach it.
All right.
What's so
great.
funny about that, Jay?
There would be a lot of great quotes in there.
That's right.
Chair and other members of the commission, thank you for having me come here and kind of go over the draft document of the North End Vision Plan. So I thought I might, just to give you the full take on it, I thought I might read it word for word. I'm not gonna do that to you. I would think what I would like to just do, and let me see if I can get this up. Let's see, get it up there. I will have the document up on the screen. And I'll go through just a very high level, talking about kind of key sections. A lot of what is in this document, if you've already had a chance to go through it, you've already seen a lot of material that's been summarized in this document by virtue of a presentation that I think we did with a lot of background data back in the fall. My colleague John Slack, I believe, was in front of the Planning Commission in late June and really talked about a lot of the key plan vision and kind of discussed elements of that. So a lot of this would be very, very familiar if you read through the document. So I'll just kind of go over real high level the elements and aspects of the document, and I'll try to focus on some of those areas that might be, not as familiar because they're sort of at the end process of this. So for example, just to break down the table of contents, we've got, there's really no point in actually talking about the table of contents. I'll just walk you guys through, as I promised, through this document. So we did put together an executive summary for those who maybe don't have the time or the patience to go through a 100-plus page document. We do have a 4-page executive summary that tries to nicely and simply summarize all of that work that's in there. But as you know, a lot of what's going to be in an executive summary, if you're into detail and you're into a lot of data and you're into kind of supporting evidence and things like that, you would be wanting more. But this document hopefully gives that to those folks who want it. But there is that executive summary that gets you, quickly to the high-level findings of everything and kind of comes to the bottom line for folks. So they're understanding of what's going on and what's happening with that. We did provide a background sort of section to kind of give folks kind of a taste of, just the site's history. We talked about related planning efforts, in particular the comprehensive plan and how that relates to the North End Vision Plan and how there's a relationship there. And the fact that Ramsey County and Metro Transit are planning for the Rush Line BRT. So we wanted to get folks up to speed and understand some of the history in terms of some of the recent thinking and other planning work that's been happening. At the same time, we did provide a section to give people just a real basic understanding of some of the important conditions that are out there today that kind of laid the groundwork and the foundation for a lot of the nature of the work. And I believe you folks might have seen this last fall. We had some slides based on this, talking about the existing land use and the zoning conditions, what the comp plan says, what's the future land use going to be, the general built form, the year structures were built. That helps us understand whether something's redevelopment ready or not based on its age, for example, property ownership, property value, the walkability and the green space access that exists today, the transit conditions and availability that's currently around today, traffic volumes. I mean, there's all these great things that, just a lot of information that, really helped the working group through all of their process as well. Regional roads and the trail system, natural systems. There's also a section where we summarized the market analysis. There's a whole nother report that was done that really dived deeply into that. I believe that was a 65, 70-page report. But we tried to summarize that in a handful of pages here and really pull out the really pertinent findings for folks and the data behind that. So we have some charts and graphs that are really kind of focused on some of those key things, drawing attention to the demographic trends, the retail market situation, and how that's going to influence and affect particularly the mall and the surrounding retail areas. And the office market, and we talked about some other case studies that looked at areas that were changes that have been happening in and around other regional malls around the country. And then we summarized the community engagement. Again, there's a lot of engagement that happened throughout this whole process. There was the North End Working Group, of which Commissioner Kempe and Arbuckle were on and participated in that. We met, I think we convened 6 or 7 times over the course of maybe about 6 months or so. But we also did a lot of engagement with the business community, and we've had a couple of different open houses. We did a pretty robust online process where we used this kind of nifty engagement tool through the city's website called Social Pinpoint. We did a survey that we regularly got out there and promoted through a variety of different ways. And we also interviewed a number of the major property owners in the North End as well. So there was quite a bit of engagement. Again, what you see in the report is we tried to do kind of a nice summarizing of that and all of the background and information like that. We actually have that in an appendix that'll be available on the city's website, and all of that gets compiled. That appendix is really, if you just went to the project website, that's really what's been posted up there. We just kind of compiled it in a real efficient way if people wanted to take a look at any of the details. So it's a lot of meeting minutes and notes and summaries of different exercises and things that were done. We have this section in the report where we talk about the vision statement and the goals, which came out of that process of kind of talking to a lot of different stakeholders and a lot of different interests. And these were these key goals, and some of the objectives underneath them really kind of drove some of the design ideas that push forward. And so we kind of put these in there to make sure that they're clear and upfront and pretty well established. So they're and now, getting into the vision plan recommendations. And I think this was something back in June, my colleague John Slack probably would have talked to you about and answered questions. We kind of came through this process and recognized the fact that being a vision plan, this is something that we're really trying to see transformative change, but knowing that there's a lot of redevelopment. That means there's a lot of private property owners that have to be involved in this process. There's a lot of potential transportation changes and things like that, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a long process. Nevertheless, we did try to think in terms of how, you create a vision, you get the community behind it, and then there's momentum that you want to be able to take advantage of, so that there are near-term things that are more likely to occur, because we know that there's vacant properties, or we know that there's property owners who might be interested in doing something different with their property, or there's just known opportunities to do something from a city investment standpoint as well. So we try to break this down into things that could happen in the near term versus those that might be more of a longer term look at it. For example, when we talked to Kohl's, which was one of the property owners we would talk to, they said, yeah, we love the idea that Maplewood's thinking new about this whole area of the city. We love the idea of more housing being near our store. But we think our store's a great store. We really like our Maplewood location. It cash flows for us really well. We don't have any immediate plans to do anything. I go, okay, all right. But they understand the vision. They understand there might be things that might happen down the road, but at that point in time in the future, where Kohl's may decide to do something with their property, there's a direction for them, or whoever buys it can have an understanding. So here's the graphic representation of the near-term sort of recommendations that we identified. A real big key focal point of this, I think, is this idea that there's a new thoroughfare that would connect the St. John's Hospital on the west end of the north end, and then with the mall on the east end of the north end. And that was really seen as something that, if we could imagine that being kind of a new spine upon which development over time can kind of grow off of, and it just serves to sort of connect and help establish new synergies among, hospital workers that might want to get to the mall, and so forth and back and forth. And also have an opportunity to really start to introduce these ideas of making the area more walkable, more green, more multimodal, so other modes of transportation other than the car, people can get around and through this area, as well as the future of BRT investment. So we had the near term, and then, as I said, there's more of this long-term vision, and then here you can see the kind of our recommendations for what could be a eventual build-out based on all of those principles and goals that we identified throughout this process. So we have we created some, nice imagery to really help people maybe visualize how some of these ideas could start to look at different perspectives. Just because you're looking at something from 10,000 feet in the air and you're looking down on top of it, it's not always that obvious as to how some of these things might look or feel. So we started to create some graphics to help folks better understand what that look and feel might be like. We did have a kind of a section here caveating the fact that we had some recommendations based on the fact that Sears is now closed, and the owner that owns it, Seritage, is actively looking for potentially a new use, potentially a redevelopment of it. Everything's on the table as far as they're concerned. But recognizing again that the mall has 5 different owners. It's not all just one single owner. This might take time. We've presented some ideas. We've also said, this mall could evolve in any number of ways, but here's some ways in which it could evolve any of which still adhere to some of those principles of, trying to create a more interesting place for retail, mixture of housing, other means upon which people can get around, be more pedestrian friendly, have more greenery, all these different elements. So we just wanted to provide that. In some ways, this was kind of a nod to some of the conversations we had had with Seritage. As a property owner, they're always sort of like, oh, people are looking at my property, what are you doing? And this is a way to let property owners understand that this is not a singular vision. There are other ways in which properties could be imagined as they evolve over time. So it gives them a little bit more understanding that, okay, yeah, there's some flexibility here. We're not going to have some one particular idea just crammed down our throat. So we wanted to give that flexibility and understanding. And again, we had some graphics in the plan to just help folks understand. There's these different sort of layers to keep in mind when thinking about these recommendations. So it's about the transit, it's about how the new streets that might get built in their hierarchy and how that's important, and the fact that pedestrian and bicycle circulation will be really important, as well as adding green space and more amenities into this area, which was something that came big time out of our working group, as well as all of that engagement that we did in the business community, as well as online with folks. We just kept consistently hearing about, the existing park and green space behind the library is fantastic. How can we introduce more of that throughout the whole North End? And some graphics help understand, we're really trying to imagine the complementary way in which different uses can work together in this area over time. That you can have housing on top of retail, for example, or you might have office on top of retail, or you might have in certain streets where it's not necessarily high traffic, you could have housing, but then around the corner you might have a more commercial use. So just to kind of illustrate that. And the ways in which we acknowledge that, at least in the near term, we have to think about parking. We can't just simply abandon the need to be able to store cars for folks. So that kind of, I think that gets you up to speed to probably some of the things that you've already been presented on some level. We probably told you about, but didn't go into any great detail, the fact that we were producing a set of design guidelines along, again, consistent with a lot of those goals and objectives that were identified. We broke the design guidelines into kind of three kind of parts that just seemed kind of natural for folks to kind of understand. There was elements around street design, how to think about that when introducing and adding new streets in the North End, building design, and then how to treat open space. So those three different areas. And and we wanted to also just acknowledge the fact that the city already has this great living streets policy, and this is just a really fantastic opportunity to really re-emphasize that policy and how it can get applied in the creation of over time new streets in the area. Just thinking about the ways in which our right-of-ways can not only accommodate cars, but, there's pedestrians, there's bicycles, how these are kind of different zones within the streetway, how we manage our stormwater, different paving and lighting along different streets, the treatment of the urban canopy and those trees on the boulevards and medians and so forth. So we just have a lot of detailed recommendations and sort of, they're kind of best management practices on how to kind of, make sure that these things sort of thrive in these environments, that some streets might have a different, for example, set of trees versus other streets in their function. So we just get to that level of detail. Again, some discussion around how to handle the parking of cars as well as bicycles. It's become increasingly important. And I'm kind of purposely going through this again, sort of high level, being fairly efficient about it. But if there is a question that comes up in your mind and you're like, whoa, wait a second. Tell me a little bit more about that. Just feel free to And so we did produce a set of sort of street cross-sections to think about not only new streets that might get added as redevelopment happens in the north end, but perhaps even looking at some of the existing streets and over time as they need to be updated and improved. Some strategies about how those improvements could maybe help kind of dovetail with, some of the other design principles that we're thinking of as well. So we had some ideas here about how and when those streets, their timeline for reconstruction, how we might think about possibilities to reconstruct them. So we have a lot of that information in here for folks to understand. New streets. And then on the building design guidelines, we're talking about, principles around just the bulk and massing. You'll notice from the graphics that we produced, a lot of the housing is going to be multifamily housing. That was really born out of the market research that was conducted. Recognizing that some of much of the residential that's already in that area is townhomes and multifamily already. But we see that the demand for those types of products just increasing over time, particularly when they're near our sort of employment centers and our transit areas. So it's really important to think about because these buildings, when they get to be 4, 5, 6+ stories, they can kind of take on a certain look and feel and a bulk and massing. So we've got some recommendations from a design guideline standpoint about how to help make that be a lot more sort of friendly to the pedestrian and other users of these areas. And we have some suggestions regarding, the heights of the buildings and how they can be and here we've got other things around building articulation in the street wall. So it's how does those sides of walls when they're closest to the streets, how do they feel? How do they function? How they might be designed to make those. And here we just have some example diagrams about how we can illustrate different ways to treat that in the building scale. And then there's discussion about, because, the north end's going to be a mixed-use area. Oh, yeah.
That was one of my big issues, was about, I'm glad to see that they added some of those elements there of making it not so dominant tall, because that was my big issue about the big tall buildings there, that I didn't really want anything over 4 stories, and then because they were kind of pushing, 7, 8 stories, and that adding that really helps then to kind of bring down the heights.
Yeah. And or if at some point somebody by right is able to design a taller building, here's some ideas to help really mitigate the impact of that. I know one of the things I think we suggested in there was that a hotel, somewhere that might be in the north end, and then we heard a lot of talk about people, hey, a hotel would be great, we'd love a new hotel in this area, and with the hospital nearby and other sort of drivers of hotel demand, that makes a lot of sense from a market standpoint. But hoteliers, they sometimes get into, depending on the site and location and their needs, they might want to go to a taller building. Well, this might give them, some direction that, if they push that envelope, here's some ways in which you can kind of mitigate the impact of that design on the street. So we've got those ideas in there, so. Good. And then, again, as I was saying, a lot of mixed use, mixing of uses in there. So we have discussions on like the different natures of different uses. So if we've got medical office, or maybe there's doing some research and development that might be tied to the medical industry, because St. John's Hospital and healthcare as a whole industry, of course, has been growing, and it's forecast to continue to grow. And, the ability to perhaps accommodate, that area becoming, more of a regional hub for different medical functions. There could be some research and development things, so things to keep in mind about those types of buildings, about, straight up office buildings, and how the appropriate design elements that might be ascribed to those. Again, talking, we have sections about talking about a hotel. What makes those work a little bit better when we're thinking about people who might not only be driving to the hotel, but might be arriving by, the car share services, or if they're at the hotel, but then they're walking to, or they're at the hospital, but they're walking to and from the hotel, for example. How to make that a little bit more livable. And we have some diagrams about how to think about the retail and the entertainment. You'll recognize in the plan, we imagine that the over time, the 1 million plus square feet of Maplewood Mall will probably shift and change. And if we don't actually redevelop parts of the mall, you'll probably have new uses in the mall, particularly in the department store areas. So we'll see, the nature of the retail in the area probably maybe be more distributed more widely throughout the north end in areas that might be at intersections of new streets and things like that at a different scale. So ways to think about how those storefronts can really function in a more pedestrian and bicycle-friendly area. And then we have some guidelines around dealing with the residential at different scales, whether it's low-rise, because we recommend and suggest that there's certainly areas within the north end that could still have low-rise housing, and how that could be. You might have some stoop areas on some of your low-traffic streets, but then when those buildings transition to being on a little bit higher traffic street, you might have some more active uses on the corner. As well as mid-rise, and how to think about how that can better fit into an area with multiple stories and things like that. And building setbacks, and how to think about those in these areas. So yeah, we're touching on these topics. Building entrances, we have nice diagrams to help illustrate, for folks how that might work and function. And getting into, how the building's going to perform and the sustainability of them as well, and lighting and signage. And then the third part of the design guidelines is the open space and how to think about that. And that it goes all the way from these small little pocket parks that might be in small areas to something that's a little bit more centralized, to something that might be more of more of an urban plaza type function, could also double as a gathering area or event space, for example, and how to kind of think about how this area could accommodate those. And we just help kind of describe the differences between these different types of open space and how they would fit in it all. And we get and introduce various site amenities, how to treat wayfinding signage and benches and lighting and things like that, and how those things can all work together to kind of create a unique environment. And then the sort of the final section of the document is thinking about, okay, and some might argue this is by and large the most important. Great. We've talked to the community, we've talked to a lot of stakeholders, we've got a lot of great ideas. We went through an iterative process to kind of hash out what kind of vision and plan might make the most sense. But at the end of the day, it's, is it realistic? Can it get done, right? So we did address how best to implement such vision. And we broke this down to a couple different ways. One is sort of timing. So we discussed the whole issue of whether it's a short-term possibility or opportunity, whether it's a long-term thing. But then we also get into things that could be done today, immediate actions. And these are a mixture of things that could be done on the policy side, as well as, low-cost types of things like restriping certain streets or intersections to be safer, or introducing bike lanes. There's adding benches in certain locations that, yes, there's a cost associated with them, but there's probably low enough that you could probably think about being able to do those today. So we wanted to get folks to understand that there are probably a set of actions we could continue and do today. We do also want to be cognizant of the fact that what we do here in the immediate or the short term shouldn't compromise what ultimately we try to do in the long term. So it's, being mindful that, you don't end up doing some sort of development in the short term that precludes the ability to, let's say, have that key east-west connection, from one end to the north end to the other, for example. We also discussed a lot of these different improvements based on whether they address movement mobility, whether they address kind of the public realm and open space, or whether they're fundamentally development related. And we did that for a couple of important reasons. One is, again, it's the timing issue. They help understand some of these things could be more short-term versus long-term. But they're also, are they driven primarily by the public sector, or is it the private sector, for example? And one of the ways that we just helped folks kind of understand this is we had a couple different tables that kind of break down the short and the long term, and we kind of talk about sort of the nature of the recommendation, who might be the responsible party. So is this fundamentally something that might be the city of Maplewood, and perhaps is there a particular department within the city that might be most responsible for this particular, or is this really something that's a partnership-driven thing? Is this something that there might be private sector partners, or there might be other agencies that might be a partner as part of this process? So we want to identify those. And then we did some bullet points on what might be some likely barriers associated with each recommendation. So that when you think about, and what I forgot to mention is that these tables are also sort of organized based on a prioritization where we did an exercise with the working group, the last meeting that we had with them. We talked about and showed all these different recommendations, and we said within each of these categories of whether it's a movement or accessibility thing, or if it's a park, public amenity or open space, or if it's development, how might you, prioritize these? So the way they appear in these tables would be kind of how the working group had sort of suggested or recommended might be a way to kind of prioritize them. Yes?
So, how much of this is owned by the public and private, in your studies?
How much of it is owned by?
How much of it is public? How much of it is private?
So we indicate on there, the likely barriers, but the question of how much is a good question, but it's also kind of difficult to really, because a lot of the ideas around, building new public streets, those would have to be publicly owned, right? But they're probably a lot of the streets we identified are currently on private property. So there's going to have to be some sort of relationship with how that private property owner decides to do with their property in the future. So we can look at those roads and go, yep, that ultimately would be a public space, but today it is privately owned. So we have to recognize that, so it's, I think the majority of the streets we have identified would probably be going through some sort of public or private property. At least the new streets would be going through some sort of private property. So a lot of that, again, today it falls into the category of privately owned. The goal is that working with the developers as they redevelop these properties over time, they would see the benefit of working with the city, and the intent is that a lot of these bigger parcels would get broken up into smaller, much more developable parcels, so that they would see the benefit of, yep, we would work with the city would acquire some of this land, and that will make these smaller parcels more valuable. So it's kind of the economics behind the thinking. So, Alan, when you ask how much, are you thinking in terms of actual physical space or financial? Because one of the things we did note in here was that these different recommendations have a general magnitude of cost associated with them. And we kind of tried to do this little dollar sign thing to help people understand is this a low, a medium, or a very high cost sort of improvement? As you'll notice, and this stands to reason, a lot of the development areas would be probably ultimately a high cost, because we're looking at, some fairly intensive new development on them. But those would be primarily, again, privately funded initiatives, unless the city wanted to be actively participate and partner in that. So, am I answering your question?
Oh, yeah, sort of, I'm just wondering, because in your studies, as it is now, based on what is trending, the mall is owned primarily by private.
Yep.
So, just like you said, if the developers see the benefit, they will work with the city to do that.
Your microphone.
Yeah, if the developer see the economic, benefit of it, that will be the decision of the developer,
Yeah.
and the city will have to pitch in because it's the city responsibility that want to increase. Another thing is that all what we have been talking about is going to, the bottom line is that the density is going to increase in that area. Yeah. So the amenities that goes with the increase in densities, should be laid out with these so that, for instance, with the increase in the density, do we have security, are the streets easily accessible by paramedics and all that stuff? Because of when you weigh the house and versus the retails, there are a lot of activities going on, things like that. So maybe additional schools, because the density is going to, not just green space and all that stuff.
Yep.
I'm not sure if you have them laid out over here, but those are the elements that might, attract the developers to be able to compromise with the city in terms of development.
Yeah. So I mean, there's the dollar equation, and I'll back up to, here, I'll kind of show you. One of the things we help do is take that table, and people can start to see on the table, there's a key, and you can go to the map and you can see generally where those improvements are identified. To your point about there's all these different things that with increased density, there's a lot more needs that happen in the community. And what the vision plan is trying to recognize is that there's a lot of flexibility in terms of where different types of uses can occur in the whole north end, frankly. And so, in other places where we did case studies of, malls that have sort of been transitioning, some of them have actually taken some of their former department stores and their educational facilities. So if there's a point at which the density increases enough that really does drive the need for a new school, there may be opportunities to adaptively reuse some of the existing retail space that's no longer viable. But there's also the ability to recognize that, a lot of these uses can and should work well together. So it's not simply about we're just going to build so many new residential units that we don't have any room to accommodate anything else. And we have now a density, where we have a neighborhood that doesn't have, critical needs being met. We would like to think that there's that space and the flexibility to be able to accommodate those different uses.
I think another one of his questions is about the private. That was the key, is that everybody has to come on board to be able to make an agreement on the development. You just can't say this is what we're going to do, that the private owners have to agree that that's really what to come into the plan. If that's what we want to develop, they want to, develop that too, the housing, and, they feel that that's what they want to do with their property.
Yeah, but what we are talking about is a private development. The private development may give up the space. They may want to convert from commercial to residential. That is their decision.
Right, and that's what they have to come on board. Yeah. So it's not like we're forcing them, but they do have to be willing to, for this to come into fruition,
Another question I have is that I think St. John's seems to be a key principle in that area, which has historically tried to,
Your microphone, yeah.
which has historically tried to portray that area to be a medical kind of stuff, you know? Is that with this vision plan, it's not driving away from there? I don't know.
No, that was kind of incorporated into it. That was kind of why we had thought of the hotel near there is because kind of enhance visitors that would come to the hospital. And there's some other medical facilities maybe on the first floor and that, on some of these buildings too, because that was kind of the key that we were kind of jumping off with that too.
Yeah, actually, a couple of these buildings that you see in this plan that are closest to the hospital were a direct relationship, in direct relation to the hospital's participation in this process. So they had membership on the working group committee, but then we also went and met with them individually as well. And they noted that they don't have any immediate plans to build another medical office building because there was just one just completed. Yeah. But they recognize that they probably have some certain specialties and things like that that they know down the road they're probably going to need more space for. So this plan was recognizing that, yeah, you know, when you're closer to the hospital, that having that sort of a medical office building or something that could work well with the hospital would be there. It was interesting, one of our early versions of these plans showed their parking lots being more developed. And in St. John's, I think just because of the internal politics of their organization, they just weren't quite comfortable showing their land that they own and control today being developed in a particular way. But it was at least heartfelt from our standpoint that those who were involved from the hospital recognized and understood that, yeah, we get it, down the road, we may want to do something more efficient with those parking lot areas. They weren't comfortable as a property owner showing that on these plans at this point. So, but they saw the benefit of creating like a greenway east-west on the north side of their big parking lot area. And they definitely want to be able to leverage the connection to the BRT stop. So they could see some small retail being built right near the BRT stop close to them. Because they told us they've got a lot of, you know, challenges with their employees not having anywhere real close by to go for lunch, which sounds a little funny because you're like, the mall's right there, right? But in healthcare, lunch breaks tend to be much, much shorter than a lot of other professions. So people tend to be, you know, pretty stressed to try to go get something real quickly. So just having something, you know, much, much closer to the hospital made sense for them. So they.
The reason why I asked that question is that because our planning commission is getting older, you know, and, you know, we have to look out for him too.
Yeah.
Well, that boulevard there too, that was kind of designed that runs to the hospital too for making them easier access to get up to that area too, because they have a hard time walking in that too,
Yep.
through there too. That was another.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that yeah, and we there's different, based on the types of recommendations, we also identified a number of potential funding sources that could be a resource, whether it's grants, that could, whether there's a taxing structure that can help capture value as new investment happens, and then that can kind of feed back in and, you know, be kind of a revolving pool of money. And there's, you know, working with the development community as they think about sort of a potential investment as well. So yeah, we've got some ideas there. It's not just simply, you know, here you go, here's a bunch of ideas, you know, good luck trying to figure out how to make them work. We have some ideas and some resources for how to generate revenue. I think that pretty much is the document. So, you know, now we can open it up if you were holding on questions, or if you just want to have a general discussion, or if there's anything. And Fred, I've already noted down the spelling. We've got we have the wrong name for you. We apologize for that.
I'm sorry. In your experience, what is the future of malls?
What's the future of the mall?
Not this particular, just mall in general. I mean, mall came out all of a sudden, everybody was having mall and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, for example, we've heard from, okay, so the main owner of the mall is a group called Washington Prime Group. And they are a real estate investment trust that I believe was spun off of, was that Simon? That was Simon, okay. Simon Properties, which is, there's two giant companies that own lots of malls across the country. Simon Properties is one of them. The other one, I think, is Growth Management Properties. So this group that owns part of the Maplewood Mall is a particular entity that has an affiliation with Simon Properties. We have heard from in presentations and talks from other Simon Properties people that they talk about when they're now to the point that when department stores actually announce closures in their mall properties, they're actually excited about that because they see the department store concept as being so outmoded at this point and a lot of these malls were, the economics around them were built around the fact that the department store was what drove people there and generated everything, and now, sadly, the era of the department store is on its way out, if it isn't almost all the way out. And so the mall owners, like Simon Properties, look at that now as they can move on and we can get much more creative and innovative about what to do with that space. I think the reality is that some of the uses that will go into these malls may not be quite the revenue generators as traditional retail was 20, 30 years ago. So there may be some sort of market correction to understand that not all 1 million square feet are going to generate X hundreds of dollars of sales per square foot. But you might have a system where you've got other uses that can make the retail that is there still viable and still attractive. And then if you build up in and around the parking lots and the neighboring blocks and you've got other things going on, now you actually create much more of a neighborhood that has value to it that's beyond just simply what the mall owner does on the inside of the building. So probably the best local example of what we're seeing is what's been happening in Southdale, if you've had a chance to go to Southdale. They've had Hennepin County has moved some of their government services into that space. I think they're now looking at putting their library in there as well. The JCPenney's is now getting reconstructed as a flagship for Lifetime Fitness. So the healthcare is becoming a really big element of it. Well, that's not healthcare, that's sort of wellness and fitness, all right. Other malls have looked at the medical model of actually bringing in medical users into the mall or educational facilities. In the parking lots of Southdale, we've seen multi-story residential. We've seen hospitality. There's a hotel that's out there, and then we've seen some of their destination retail take over parts of those outlots and kind of build new structures. And so it's that, and your question, Alan, is, what are these malls going to do? And I think everyone agrees it's going to be a challenge, but I think we're starting to see some of the ideas that are now percolating that seem to be probably giving us some direction as to what happens. In some communities, the malls die and they just have one owner, and then they just close shop and they tear the whole thing down and they redo the whole site. That is a challenge here because, as I was saying before, the Maplewood Mall has 5 different owners to it. So Kohl's may be perfectly happy with how their business is operating today, and they're not going to tear down their store tomorrow. Sears in Seritage, I don't know, they might want to, do something. Now, you might see parts of the mall get demolished and then maybe rebuilt in some way. Or over time, the whole thing slowly turns into something different. Or you see people reusing the building in really creative, economically viable ways. So, yeah.
Was there a part in here that talked about energy efficiency and green building in that too? I don't.
Yeah, we've got a section in the design guidelines under the building types where we talk a little bit about the whole thing behind sort of sustainability and trying to promote green roofs and more efficient building construction techniques and things like that. So there's some discussion there about building performance, and we have a set of guidelines that we think might be helpful.
Okay. Bill?
Nothing.
John?
Great.
Yeah, it was awesome job.
Thank you.
Jay.
Thank you.
And Michael too. Awesome job, Michael. I know you spent a lot of time on it too.
A great effort by all, and including, we do want to thank the two members that served on the working group and the working group as a whole, because we know that a lot of time was volunteered on guiding this document, so there's a great appreciation there. I would remind the commission that we are looking for a motion that we would forward to the city council.
Bill?
I would like to make that motion.
I'll second it. All those in favor? Aye.
Do we need a reading of my motion or just in?
Yes, I think you guys represented us over there. I would like to,
Okay, I would
Understand what it is?
recommend adoption of the North End Vision Plan. That's my motion.
Okay, and I second that.
Okay.
And everybody said ayes?
Aye.
I'm
Aye.
hearing all ayes. Passed. This will go before the city.
Chair and Commission, and that actually kind of gets to the next item that's listed on your commission, or on your agenda under commissioner presentations, 9A, the September 9th city council meeting. Commissioner Arbuckle is slated for that meeting, and we are looking for the council to make both adoption of the North End Vision Plan, but actually adoption of the 2040 Comprehensive Plan. And I can give a brief update there, where the comprehensive plan was at the Metropolitan Council's Community Development Committee on August 5th, first week of August, if I'm slightly off on that date. But they recommended approval of Maplewood's comprehensive plan, and the full Metropolitan Council is expected to adopt it next Wednesday, so a week from tomorrow. And then at that point, the city is finally, after this kind of 2-year journey of updating our comprehensive plan, will be able to will be authorized to implement the plan, and the new land use plan will be what is the controlling document.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's a big stepping stone.
Yeah.
Kind of one interesting tidbit is the Met Council has around 180 comprehensive plans they have to review and adopt, and we're about number 20 in that line. So our 2030 plan, we are one of the last ones to kind of stumble in, and on this one, we're one of the first ones to get through. So that's kind of nice to see that go through. So that's all I have.
Was I scheduled for there, or you just?
No,
Be in the-
September 9th hasn't happened yet, Commissioner. So if you're able to attend, that's where we would have you provide the planning commission perspective on both those documents.
Sure.
All right.
I don't think there's anything else. You have nothing?
I have nothing further for you tonight, Commission.
Does anybody else want to talk about anything? Or?
Nope.
Fred
Can
wants
I
to-
ask a historical question in regards to
Make a motion.
in regards to getting a perspective as a new member on plans?
Scheduled.
Like the Gladstone plan. The Gladstone plan was kind of undergoing when I moved here.
Sure.
And watching that develop. When was that plan originally initiated and to where we are now? And just kind of help me with the timeline.
Sure, Chair and Commission, the Gladstone Master Plan there was a working group, or I don't know if they're called, what their technical term was, but in the mid-2000s, so around 2005, is when that plan was being created, and it was ultimately adopted in spring of 2007. So you can see there was some time before when that plan was adopted and when you saw some real movement in that neighborhood, and definitely, there's only been a couple dominoes that have fallen, I guess, based on what that plan laid out. So, yeah, these vision plans are definitely long-term planning documents, and that's why when Jay walked through, there's kind of that, in this plan, there's a short-term vision, which is still 5-10 years, and then a long-term vision to kind of set those expectations.
Yeah, and so where do you think we are in that picture of how far developed is that vision plan where we are today?
In
considering-
terms of Gladstone,
Yes.
I would say there's still a good amount of work to be done.
Okay.
I think when we'll consider, I wouldn't say the word success, but when the market is starting to take care of it itself, the two, Gladstone and North End are definitely distinct areas, and there's different market forces at play. The city is still the leading driver of what's going on in terms of redevelopment in Gladstone. I think it would be our hope in the North End that we're never really needing to be that active to make serious change happen. Gladstone, we still need to be in the driver's seat.
Thank you for that historical perspective.
Sure.
Mike?
We asking a lot about the Savannah or the whole
I was talking
project?
about the whole, I was just trying to get a concept of, when we're looking at vision plans, on that whole element of how do you get private involved, how do you get public involved, how do you, because this is just a vision.
Yeah.
But we need dollars and builders and, new ideas. You need a lot of shareholders buying in, so.
Yeah, it could be another 20, 30 years.
And Chair and Commission, again, in terms of the North End, it's a known area, and we hope a lot of that innovation and vision comes from others. We're just setting the table at this point and providing parameters. Gladstone is definitely, it's more an active redevelopment effort from the city, even in terms of the city buying the former Moose Lodge property, because that, really why the city purchased that is to make sure there wasn't another user that kind of occupied that site for 10 to 20 years, and now that important corner that's in the middle of the neighborhood, right next to Rush Line, now you couldn't do anything with it. So we wanted to make sure that we help guide what that next use will be, because the market isn't there yet to support the vision of the master plan.
Everybody's good? Mm-hmm. Okay. I make a motion, we adjourn at 7:58.
Second.
Second. All those ayes? Ayes?
Aye.
Hearing one no from Ellen?
You can stay.